Thank you very much. We'll start by signing three very important bills. And Will, would you discuss them, please?
History shows us something interesting. Great powers don't always fall to foreign leaders, they collapse from within through the choices of their leaders. The vast modern empire that once stretched from Afghanistan to Bengal was squeezed to just the Magadha region. Rome also rotted from internal decay much before the barbarians entered its gates. And even in modern history, in present-day America, Herbert Hoover's decision to resist relief programs and large-scale government spending worsened the Great Depression. These days, I can sense a similar feeling for USA under the leadership of Mr. Donald Trump. I've been making videos on US debt and policies, and one thing that I see is that Mr. Trump is acting against the very vital elements on which US economy rules. Those are debt, trust, and alliances. Let's break them down. Here's the first big crack that America faces, that is debt. After the World War II, US debt peaked at around 119% of the GDP. That was during an extraordinary global crisis. But today, debt is even higher at around 123% of the GDP, and there is no world war to blame. So logically, you would expect the government to act responsibly to bring the debt levels down. Instead, we are seeing the opposite. In 2025, President Trump pushed through his so-called mega bill packed with sweeping tax cuts and massive new spending. And let's be clear, the biggest winners from those tax cuts were the wealthy Americans. According to the Congressional Budget Office, this law will drive US debt up by another $3.4 trillion over the next decade, while slashing government revenues by $4.5 trillion. Now, running up debt is one thing, but picking up fights with the very people who finance that debt is another level of greatness that few people, including Mr. Trump, can manage.
Then seeing the Indian leader holding hands with Vladimir Putin, having a laugh with him and Xi Jinping, might suggest his plan has backfired.
So for those who do not know, here's how it works. The US sells treasury bonds to cover its overspending and the interest payments on its debt. Foreign nations like China, the UK, and even India are major buyers of these treasury bonds. So this is a win-win setup for both the sides because the US gets money to finance its debt, and these foreign nations also need dollars for their international trade, and also the US treasuries are seen as a safe haven for their investments. But today that trust is being tested. So with Trump's trade wars, sudden tariffs, and unpredictable moves, even America's closest allies have started to ask, should we look out for an alternative to the dollar? Should we find a safer place to park our money? This is well evident in nations selling off their US bonds and reluctant to buy new bonds. China, which once held over $1.3 trillion in US treasuries, today it's down to $765 billion. India also cut its US bond holdings from $242 billion in June 2024 to $227 billion in June 2025. Why? Because America's endless deficits, supplemented by Mr. Trump's chaotic tariffs and tax cuts, make the US debt look even more riskier. Let's also talk about trust, which the USA is losing day by day. The dollar was backed by gold until 1970s, as we saw. Today it is backed by the confidence that America is stable, reliable, and has stable policies and regulations. But under Mr. Trump, that trust is cracking. More than the external threats like the tariffs and the trade wars, he had internal rifts with the Federal Reserve.
So we're taking a look, and it looks like it's about 3.1 billion. It went up a little bit, or a lot. So the 2.7 is now 3.1.
I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, it just came out.
Even the Dodge, which was meant to cut down on unwanted spendings in the US, in fact did not do so. and was responsible for mass resignations and firings among senior officials and tens of thousands of federal workers. Dodge initiated sweeping cuts, reportedly shutting down 11 federal agencies, 1 lakh federal resignations, and over 1 lakh firings.
Criticism over its lack of transparency.
Doge's wall of savings has been highly unreliable, riddled with numerous errors.
Good or bad is another thing, but this level of disruption in a very short span of time in the government increased the uncertainty and the controversy in the working of the government. Although business investments have not declined internally in America, but evidently foreign nations are hedging against the dollar. Russia and China are pushing trade in local currencies. BRICS is building its own payment system. And gold buying by central banks by selling off their US bonds are hitting record levels. In 2025, for the first time since 1996, gold represents a bigger share of central banks' reserves than the US treasuries. Now let's also look at the bigger clash where Mr. Trump's Buy American dream collides head on with the dollar's status as a world reserve currency. So here's the setup. The global financial system runs on the US dollar. In fact, in 2025, 79% of the international trade was invoiced in the US dollars. That means most of the international trades happening, chances are the transaction is being invoiced or billed in the US dollars. So where do these dollars come from? See, only the US can print them. The rest of the world can only earn dollars by either selling goods and services directly to America or by trading internationally in markets priced in dollars, like the oil and commodities market. Take, for example, Vietnam selling t-shirts to the USA, Japan selling cars, and Saudi Arabia selling oils to the USA. All of them earn dollars this way. But here's the catch. This mechanism only works if America runs a trade deficit. When the US imports more than it exports, these extra dollars flow out into the world, fueling the world economic market. Now imagine Mr. Trump succeeds in his plan and America makes everything at home and even runs a trade surplus. Sounds patriotic, right? But in reality, it would choke off the supply of dollars to the world economy. A dollar shortage would force nations to look out for alternatives. And we are already seeing the early signs. Energy contracts are increasingly being priced in non-dollar currencies. BRICS nations are openly discussing about alternatives to the dollar. And this is exactly the problem or the dilemma that renowned economist Mr. Robert Triffin warned us about in 1960s. If America cuts its deficits to protect its domestic industries, then it risks the dollar's reserve status. But here's the uncomfortable truth that deficits alone aren't the problem. The dollar stays the king until the foreign investors trust the American institutions and policies. But what happens when deficits collide with political mismanagement, reckless fiscal choices, and much talks about a real alternative to the dollar in the horizon? That's when the whole system can unravel faster than anyone expects. So I'll ask you, do you think that USA can balance this tightrope, or is the world already preparing for a life after the dollar? Please comment. The point is, when the world starts asking if the dollar is still safe, America's real power weakens. Let's also talk about alliances. For the past 70 years, America built a web of alliances that magnified its power. NATO in Europe, trade deals in Asia, and strategic alliances with countries like India. But Mr. Trump flipped the script. He insulted the NATO allies, demanding they pay up or lose the US protection.
If we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? I said, you didn't pay, you're delinquent. He said, yes, let's say that happened. No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would.
Tariffs, especially on allies like Canada and the Europe, turned friends to not so friends. Even India, once touted as America's natural partner, was hit with 50% tariff, allegedly for trading oil with Russia. That, in fact, brought India closer to China, once its major rival country. The point is, even if the government changes, 2025 has been a wake-up call for nations. A wake-up call that they cannot simply rely on the US as their major export partner. a partner who provides military aid and protection, and even a reserve currency for international trade. The world somewhere now thinks of creating alternatives to these. Interestingly, Mr. Trump has been good with rival nations like Russia and North Korea at some instances. So let's step back and see that America's rise has been resting on three invisible pillars. Debt it could easily finance and pay for its extravagant budgets on defense, technology, businesses, which in turn made it a superpower. Trust in its currency and institutions, and alliances that multiplied its strength. For decades, these pillars held firm, making America the undisputed global leader. But currently, debt is exploding, alliances are breaking, and trust is fading. History warns us, great powers don't collapse overnight. They collapse when their foundations rot. And if America continues down this path, it won't be the foreign enemies who bring it down. It would be the choices of its own leaders. Thank you. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe and comment. It would help me to run this YouTube channel successfully. Thanks.